Hey folks, so today we're going to make a loaf of sourdough bread. I've made a video about how I make my starter. If you haven't got a starter, obviously the first thing you're going to have to do is you should watch that video, get your starter developed, and then come back to this. We're just going to make one loaf today. I'll leave the recipe, I'll have a graphic of the recipe for this starter at the end of the video. So the first thing we have to do though is, as you learned in the starter video, is I need to have my starter fed and ready for today's recipe. So I'm going to grab my starter out of the refrigerator. It's been in there since the last time I used it, and there's only a little bit in there. So as you can see here, there's literally, probably a big spoonful that's left. Now that starter, that's what was left of the starter the last time I used it. And as I indicated in the video about making starters, what I do is, rather than feed it every day, once I have it, once you have a mature starter, I simply put the lid on it loosely, stick it in the refrigerator, and when I'm ready to bake another loaf or two of sourdough bread, then I take it out of the refrigerator, and what we're going to do now is feed it. So I've already pre-measured 50 grams of flour. I'm going to put that in there. And an equal amount, 50 grams of water. And I'm going to put that in there. And I'm just going to give this a good stir to make sure that all the water, the flour, and the little bit of starter that was in there, and I just scraped the crumbs off the edge there. Just make sure they get well mixed. And it shouldn't take an eternity to do it, but...
One eternity later.
Okay, so now it's mixed up well, and what I have in there is probably just over 100 grams of starter, because I just put in 50 grams of flour and 50 grams of water, which is 100 grams, and then there was some in there, maybe 25 grams or so. So anyways, now what I need to do is set this somewhere. You can set it in your oven with just the light on, just in any place that's nice and warm. And it should take, if you have an active starter, this should take anywhere between 4 to 8 hours before it becomes active. Now, what a lot of people do is they put this in they make the starter the night before they go to bed, set it on their counter, and then when they wake up in the morning, the starter will be ready to use. And that gives it plenty of time to do what starter does, which is feed on that food you just gave them. Okay, but I already have some starter that is ready to go this morning, and so we'll use that. Okay, so we're back. We have the ingredients kind of assembled in front of me, and I'm going to go over what they are. Like I said earlier, there'll be a graphic of all the ingredients at the end of the video. But in short, what I have here is 450 grams of flour, and again, I use a digital scale to make sure it's accurate. 450 grams of flour. Now, today what I did was I'm using just 350 grams of just regular bread flour that you can get at Publix. And then I also put in 100 grams of organic rye flour. And you can do whatever mixtures you want. If you want to do whole wheat, it's up to you. I would encourage you to experiment. To that, you're going to add 8 grams of kosher salt into the flour that I already weighed. Okay, and just give that a quick mix. Now the next part is I have room temperature water, and this is 310 milliliters, 310 grams of room temperature water. So in addition to the water, we're going to be adding 100 grams of our starter. This is the leavening agent, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zero out my scale that has the water in there. And I'm going to add 100 grams. I'm going to add 100 grams of this starter. Now you can see this starter, what it looks like. This is a rye starter, but whatever starter you have. So I'm going to put it in until I get to 100. Okay, that's perfect. Okay, so now I have my 310 milliliters of water and the 100 grams of starter, and I'm just going to give that a stir to break the starter up just a little bit. It doesn't have to, again, you don't have to go crazy with it, just breaking it up a little bit. Okay, and then once I'm done, I'm going to add that to my flour. Okay, and now the next task is for us to get the flour to absorb or incorporate all that water and starter and salt that we just put in there. Okay, so we're going to, what I do anyways, is I stir it a little bit first with a spoon. Okay, wet my hands a little bit. Then you get your little bench scraper out. And then you use a little plastic scraper and you can just work the dough, okay, like this, and just keep working it until that flour and water are all well incorporated, and you're going to have kind of a little bit of a shaggy dough there. And again, I just keep wetting my hands. The flour and dough mixture doesn't stick as much. Okay, and just keep mixing it. Now this could take, 4 or 5 minutes.
A few moments later.
Okay, so as you can see, after about 4 or 5 minutes of just working it with this little spatula or bench scraper, whatever you call it, now I have the dough that has absorbed all the water, okay? And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cover it, and we're gonna let this rest for 30 minutes. And we're gonna come back in 30 minutes and do the first set of stretch and folds.
Many tic-tacs later.
Okay, so we mixed the flour and the starter and the water and everything together, and we let it, we just let it rest for the past 30 minutes. Covered it up, let it rest. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna do a series of what's called stretch and folds. And this is where we're kind of, again, we're helping the bread to develop the gluten to get stronger. And all we're gonna do is simply just kind of moisten the work surface, moisten your hands. And with clean hands, you're gonna take the bread out of the out of the mixing bowl that you had it sitting in for the last 30 minutes. And again, it's much easier if your hands are wet. And just going to come in the middle of the bread. Okay, so you're going to pick up the bread and fold it over itself. Okay, so you're doing what's called stretch and fold. So you're picking it up, folding it over. Again, if it's a little too sticky, wet your hands a little more. Pick it up, fold it over. Pick it up, fold it over. Okay, and you're going to do this for about 30 seconds. You're not doing it forever. Just you're getting the bread to give a little bit of stretching done, and then with cupped hands, just kind of roll it around a little bit until you get a little bit of a ball. You can set that back in the bowl, give a little spritz on top, cover it, and we're going to let this sit for 2 hours. And then in 2 hours, we're basically going to do the same thing. We're going to do a set of stretch and fold. So we'll set a timer, we'll come back in 2 hours and do the next set of stretch and fold.
2 hours later.
Okay, so it's been 2 hours since we did our first set of stretch and fold exercises. And now we're going to do the same thing. Again, we're going to just wet the work surface, wet your hands a little bit there. That just helps keep it from sticking. And then using a bench scraper, I'm just going to get that dough out onto the surface. And then what you're going to do again, pick it up in the middle and fold it over itself. And you're going to do that several times. Again, when it's tacky, you can just wet your hands. You don't want to use flour, because if you add flour in this to be able to work with the dough, at that point you're changing the hydration of the dough. It's not gonna come out the same. It's not gonna taste as good. So use the water. Okay, so we've done just a few more stretch and folds there. Okay, we're going to set it back into the container, and we're going to let it sit for 2 more hours. We're going to do a final set of the stretch and folds, and then we'll talk about where we go from there. See you in 2 hours.
2 hours later.
Okay, so it's been another 2 hours, and we're going to do the last set of the stretch and folds. So again, we're just going to kind of wet the surface, the work surface here, wet our hands, and we're going to take the dough out of our bowl onto the counter. And again, we're just going to do these stretch and folds. Okay. And just like last time, we're only going to do this probably 30 to 45 seconds. Not a lot. Again, this dough it's going to end up in the refrigerator overnight, and that will help it to also build its gluten, and you don't want to overwork it. Okay, so again, we're just going to, with cupped hands, kind of get it into a ball shape. We're going to put it back into the container and cover it. Easier said than done. Okay, so now we're going to wait 1 hour, and at the end of that hour, we're going to do what's called the pre-shape. And so we'll be back in 1 hour to show you how we do that.
1 hour later.
Okay, so it's been an hour, and our dough has been resting. Now what we're going to do is called the pre-shape. So we're going to just do a gentle pre-shaping. This time, no water. We're going to use just a little bit of flour. I'm going to dust a little bit on the top here. And then I'm going to take the dough, trying to be, again, very careful, because at this point, the dough has built up a little bit of gases from sitting there, which is what we want. And all we're going to do now is we're going to pre-shape this into a ball, because eventually, in the next step, 1 hour from now, we're going to shape it and we're going to set it in the banneton, okay? And I'll explain what that is later. So for this step, all we're going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of flour around, not a ton, just so the dough doesn't stick. You can use your little bench scraper to get up under it. Okay, so all I'm going to do is take it and stretch it over to about the middle. Do the same thing here. Then go up at the top and do the same. And then do a couple here toward the bottom. And so now what we've done is we are stretching it over, pulling the non-sticky part over onto itself. So now what we can do is we can put a little bit of flour on that. Okay. Flip it over. And then using our hands, we can again just kind of roll it, or cup our hands and turn it such that what you're doing is you're creating a little bit of surface tension right here. Okay, so all we're doing is, as we turn it, we're kind of pushing our hand under it a little bit, not a lot, okay? And we do that a few times until we have a nice ball. I'm going to throw a little bit of flour in my bowl, a little bit on the bread, and then I'm just going to pick it up, set it inside, and we're going to let this rest 1 more hour. And when we come back in 1 hour, we're going to do the final shape, where we shape it similar to what we just did, put it in the banneton, and then we're going to put the banneton in the refrigerator and let it do a cold fermentation overnight. See you in 1 hour.
1 hour later.
Okay, so welcome back. We've been we did our pre-shape and we let it rest for 1 hour. And so now we're going to take it out and we're going to do the final shape. And again, same concept. Do a light flouring of the work surface. Put the dough on there. And what we're going to be putting it into once we have done the final shape, it's called a banneton. And it's just a basket that you put a little flour in, you put your dough in there, and it allows it to proof as long as you want. And in this case, we're going to put it in the refrigerator overnight. So these you can get these on Amazon. They're called bannetons, and they have different shapes. The round is probably the easiest for most people. So all we're going to do is we're going to put a little flour in it. When you first get them, you know, it's kind of recommended you may spray it with a little bit of water and put the flour in at that time, but really not too big of a deal. So now for the final shape, again, what we're going to do is the same thing we did before. Is I'm just going to lightly, now remember, we don't want to you know, deflate all the gases that have built up in the bread. So we're just going to lightly kind of fold the edges into the middle is the best way to describe it. Okay? And then pinch them. That's what I do. And it gets them to kind of stick that way. And so what that does is, again, it kind of creates a little bit of surface tension. So I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to do what I've done before, and that's to kind of push your hand under a little bit and push against it. So you're kind of creating that tension. You're making a ball out of it. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to dust the surface of the bread. Not a ton, but you know, enough to where it's dry. And then I'm going to flip it over and put it in the basket. Okay, we're done. So at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to put it in the refrigerator, and we're going to let it sit overnight, and then tomorrow morning we'll get up and we'll score it and bake it. See you in the morning. One thing I wanted to mention, if you remember in the morning when we fed that starter that I got out of the refrigerator, we fed it, and you know, it was about here, so it's more than doubled in about 6 hours time. And you can see what it looks like. That's a pretty active starter. Now, I'll leave it out, and you know, probably by the time I go to bed tonight, it will go some more. So that's what you're looking for to see an active starter. When it does that, that means you can use that in your baking.
The next morning.
Well, good morning. It's the next day, and we're at the point in our process where we're going to score the loaf, put it in the oven, cook it, and enjoy some great sourdough bread. Now, I took the Banneton with our loaf of sourdough bread. I took it out of the refrigerator about 2 hours ago, and that's just to let it kind of come up close to room temperature. And meanwhile, I also am preheating my oven to 475 degrees, along with the Dutch oven and its lid in the oven. I'll let that preheat for about 45 minutes to an hour, so that when I take it out of the oven and put the bread in there, put the lid on, it's piping hot, because that's what you want for this bread. When you put the lid on and you put it in the oven, it's going to release some steam. That's going to allow the crust to develop nicely. It's also going to rise, and that's why we score it with a lame, a razor blade, where you make that cut across the top of the bread, and that allows the bread to expand, and it in essence breaks apart at that seam that you made, rather than, you know, being kind of all over the place. So let's get started. In order to take it out of the Banneton, I always just kind of let gravity help and just gently pull. Don't try and force it. Just kind of rotate it and let it release on its own. There we go. And we're just going to gently set it down on the parchment paper. And then when you score it, you're going to come from one side to the other, and at about a 45-degree angle. And I do it about a 1/4 inch deep, maybe even a little bit deeper. But you're just going to kind of gently come across it. And I do a little bit of a curved pattern and kind of make sure it goes all the way. And you can also use a really good serrated knife. You don't have to have a lame. You can use a really good serrated knife for it. Just be careful not to, to tear the bread. So we're going to go ahead and take the Dutch oven out. And here is where you want to be as quick as possible. So I've got the oven out. I'm going to put my bread in. Put the lid back on. And put that back in the oven. Okay, so we're gonna let that cook at 475 degrees for 15 minutes. After 15 minutes, I'm gonna set a timer. I'm gonna reduce the temperature to 350 degrees. At that point, I'm gonna cook it another 21, 22 minutes, sometimes even longer. Everybody's oven is a little bit different. So it can be anywhere from 20 to 25 minutes. And really, you don't have to worry too much about overcooking it. Some people don't like it, to be, very dark. To me, it doesn't matter. So it's really your personal preference. The last thing I'll also say is I use a Dutch oven. I think that's, for the most consistent results, that's the easiest way to do it. You can have like a pizza stone or a pizza steel in your oven and also get it very hot, but then you would need to introduce some steam, right? So you would take a roasting pan, put some water in there, put it in the oven so that it is steaming, because that helps the crust to develop properly, okay?
More moments later.
Okay, so the bread has finished its bake, and we'll take the lid off, put it over here, and we're going to take this bread out and put it on a wire rack here. That's hot. And I can move this out of the way. And so what we have is a pretty decent looking loaf of bread, I think. And you see where we did our scoring here, allowed that bread to expand rather than breaking in, 5 or 6 different places. So it's nicely done. We need to let this cool probably an hour before we cut into it. And yeah, so that really is it. I hope that it helps you want to go out and make some sourdough bread. Boy, I'll tell you what, we sure enjoy it, and it tastes really, really good. So I hope the video was helpful. If it was, give it a thumbs up, a like, subscribe, whatever. And maybe I'll do a couple other things on this channel and help folks out. But appreciate it. Have a great day.